Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Dolly Wideman-Scott, and I am the Chief Executive Officer for the Domestic Violence Center in Chester County. The mission of the Domestic Violence Center is to reduce, remedy, and prevent domestic violence in Chester County. Today, during our Lunch and Learn, we are really excited that we have Sheriff Fredda Maddox, who will be joining in the conversation about Juneteenth and other matters. And Fredda has been a long term supporter of the Domestic Violence Center. Now, Fredda will come on and I will ask her questions.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Dolly. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you also. So, as we all know, that the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves in 1863. And after the slaves had been free and the Civil War was over, some individuals in Texas still had slaves and would not let them go. And they kept them as slaves for more than 2 years. And of course, when they were called to the task of releasing the slaves, the slave owners, they were never punished. So Juneteenth is the anniversary of June the 19th, 1865. That's the last day where American Black slaves were free. And it is the day that we celebrate our freedom and accomplishments that have been credited to Black people. Slavery, yes, has been abolished legally, but today many are still enslaved. So, Sheriff Maddox, talk about your knowledge about the issue of domestic violence and also its intersection with slavery.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, I actually was an attorney at the Domestic Violence Center for a few years here in Chester County. And in part, how I got involved was I actually had been a police officer, had been a state trooper, had responded to a lot of domestic violence calls. So that was something that was very much of interest to me. When I think about Juneteenth, where officially, I mean, we know about the Emancipation Proclamation, but when we officially think about when the slaves were actually free, it very much parallels with Juneteenth as well as domestic violence. You think about women who are in domestic violence situations, it is a form of slavery. It may be a financial situation that they're enslaved. They have no means of support. It may be also emotional, difficulty that they're having because of the fact that they're not only being physically abused. You think about slavery, I think everybody thinks about the physical, but how about the financial? How about the ability to really have your independence? So when we look at the Domestic Violence Center, that's the wonderful thing that you have, freedom through empowerment. So even though the slaves were actually proclaimed free, there was a lot of things that they still needed. Think about it. You've been in a situation where you have been dependent on a slave master for your substance, your food, even basic shelter. And I'm not painting a pretty picture at all, but nevertheless, the moment the slaves were free, no different than a woman or a man who's been in a domestic violence situation that have been financially exploited. They come out, they may not have the money to rebuild their lives, no different than when the slaves, they had no means to rebuild their lives financially. They have children now. What happens to that child? And also there is still that psychological attachment. We know that even though you're in an abusive situation, you may not like your abuser, but yet there is that still emotional, psychological tie of what happens to me next? Where will I go now? Where will I live? And that's the same thing for the slave who was becoming free. Where will I leave now? Yes, I'm free, but how do I rebuild?
Mm-hmm.
How do I support myself? And especially when we know that the laws were still in place, then even though technically they were free, there were still laws. And that was the whole thing that constantly, even now, and fighting for civil rights and certain things. So people would be able to apply for a job or get certain things, but that didn't even happen back then. So it's definitely an intersection. When I think about Juneteenth, you can proclaim it. So you got a PFA, technically you're free, but there's a whole ball of wax that goes along with that whole situation before that victim or that survivor. And it's a survivor. When you've been a slave, you've been a survivor. No different than the domestic violence person. You're a survivor. And so I like the term versus a victim, you are a survivor. How will you survive? How will you survive in your newfound freedom? So,
Right.
yes.
And again, just as you stated the analogy between slavery and victimization, again, we all know that it is difficult. And then when one does get free, when they come into the shelter of the domestic violence center or go to a family or friend's house, again, there's a whole lot of fear and unknown about what am I going to do the next moment? What am I going to do the next day? And with domestic violence survivors, we as one organization know that it is critical that we continue to provide support for survivors, and we continue to be that safety net. And we know that from time to time there will be holes in that safety net, and we just say we're here to support. And in terms of that, in terms of freedom through empowerment,
Mhm.
we know that domestic violence doesn't discriminate, and that it affects all communities, all neighborhoods. And we know that there are systemic challenges that affect communities of color differently. What are the signs or the challenges that survivors of color uh, that they face when they are seeking assistance? Can you talk about that, Sheriff Maddox?
Yeah, well, let's just be honest, and we've been having a conversation in this country more so since the incident with George Floyd. So we are more talking about systemic racism, and all survivors of domestic violence face a form of systemic bias. Before I understood domestic violence, it would not be uncommon for, and that's why we're educating our law enforcement. Lady, why don't you just leave? And I'm saying lady because it's simply because it tends to happen to women more than men. But for those who are men out here, I'm not trying to leave you out the loop. It just happens to be statistically more involving women. But a lot of times it would be, and for the men, just the opposite. It would be man up. Like, why don't you just leave? So for a person of color, you think about it across the board, there is a issue or bias. You just need to get out of that situation. We know it's complicated. It's not, it's multiple layers that goes into the process. So now you add a person of color, let's lose something basic as housing. Okay. And we're fortunate that the Domestic Violence Center does have a housing component with it, where some programs do not. But now for some of the housing programs, maybe a Section 8 or something else, the credit, being able, sometimes people sit there and say, I don't want you applying or living in my community, yet alone being able to even get a viable job, to be able to, your credit, to get your credit together, be able to apply for a job, to be able then even to apply for the housing. We still know that there's housing discrimination. guys have heard some of that from some of your survivors. It's coded, I mean, they don't come out and blatantly do that. I mean, we understand there's things under fair housing and different laws of protection, but nevertheless, it's there. It's very subtle. So even that, and even unfortunately, in terms of financially, when it comes to custody and support, it may be one survivor whose husband or former partner makes a whole lot more money than the person of color. So therefore, even trying to get maybe if it's spousal support or child support, you can't get blood out of a stone. So that's something unique also that they have. And also just having family support. A lot of times there may not be that family support, or there may be a longer history in maybe the African American or the person of color's family that mom and dad can't care for the child. So that's a whole nother issue when it comes to dependency. If the child had to be placed, maybe because there's a criminal history or incarceration. But those are some of the factors that I think that might be unique to a person of color. People come with their biases, and let's call it what it is. So that's what they're facing, in addition to being a survivor of domestic violence. Just the whole systemic issue of racism applies. And like I said, things are done very cleverly these days. They don't come right out and say it, but you kind of know what it is. So
right. And again, the list continues in terms of the systemic bias. And as we all know, also that the pandemic has also added another layer in terms of compounding the difficulty for survivors to leave and get out of the situation and look for help. And again, there is even more of a catch-22 situation, that individuals have a desire to work. However, they have dependent children at home and no one to care for them.
Right.
And it's really nothing but bad choices for survivors. And in addition to that, for communities of color, you touched on the financial discrimination, et cetera, that individuals really don't realize that in trying to rent property, a non-person of color may be asked just to pay the first months and last months, but a person of color may be asked to pay double the amount in order to gain entry into housing. And that there's always that perception, because one is of color, that they are not educated, that they don't want anything better, and that we cannot trust them. And so that's a real issue that society is continuing to deal with. And as we know, over the last year, that has increased significantly. And so in terms of our tagline, freedom through empowerment, what can others do to facilitate freedom through empowerment? What can employers do? I can go down the list. What can the community do? What can communities of faith do to address the systemic racism?
Well, I know some people don't like the phrase, it takes a village, but really it does take a village to try to address these issues. And I'm glad that some of as much as I hate the civil unrest that has occurred in this country, but I'm glad that it has brought it to the forefront. It will take the churches to perhaps have forums of bringing people together, meeting with law enforcement. Unfortunately, I am at a church, even though we're meeting, virtually still. But prior to all this happening, they actually had what they call courageous conversations. Let's have
Mm-hmm.
a conversation about policing and race and bringing diverse people together in a forum. One thing typically, irregardless of your religious belief, typically a common ground, people still have a respect for the church, whether it's the synagogue or it's the mosque or
Mm-hmm.
it's the church, that you can come and peacefully assemble and just talk about those things. And it's going to take, I would say, sometimes people of faith who's saying, no, you're my brother, okay? You're my sister, okay? I'm just remembering, for me, it's the Bible, the biblical precepts of treating your neighbor as yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things. In terms of employers, understanding it takes all kinds of people, and just meeting in your challenging your employee. Maybe it's through a survey. I know in Chester County, they kind of did a survey of all the employees to have a better understanding of diversity. If you are a person of color, do you think it's diverse enough? Where do you find that perhaps there is some kind of bias, treatment, whatever like that? So that's how employers can come into play. It's funny. I'm a member of the Chester County Bar Association, and never forget, a few years ago, one of the incoming presidents says, "Look around this room," and I know, Dolly, you come to the annual meetings as well. And as he looked around the room, he says, "What is the elephant in the room? What is missing in this room?" And the thing that they realized, that around that room, other than myself and maybe you, Dolly, and one other person, there was no one of color. And so we should not be in a monolithic. So one of the things that I can say the Bar Association did was challenge the law firms to say, hey, and that's an employer, we need to figure out how to diversify. And so they had a whole thing with a diversity program, reaching out to the law schools so that it could be a better representation even in the Justice Center and even in the law firms. So I know Chester County is at the point now, as an employer, they're beginning to explore more and have monthly and quarterly meetings with a core group of people on how do we address this. If you see right now outside of the Justice Center, they actually, for the first time, erected a pride flag that had never happened before to recognize the LGBTQ community. That's the first time that I can recall that's happening, because it's all kinds of people, just not people of color, LGBTQ. So yes, June is Pride Month and is really important. And so that's something that the county is recognizing. And as well, I give them to their credit. Last year, they proclaimed June 19th as Juneteenth, and actually made it a floater holiday and also raising awareness and doing more county activities to raise awareness as to exactly it is. So those are the kind of things that an employer can certainly do. I'm long-winded, I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're fine.
Okay.
Actually, in terms of that, and Domestic Violence Center is also an employer, and this year we did really take the strategic initiative in terms of having again discussions on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we are continuing to have those discussions. And next fiscal year, which for us, it begins on July the 1st, we will have a forum that we will invite our stakeholders to participate in. And also, we are fortunate that we just recently received a grant from the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence that will enable us to do more diversity, equity, and inclusion activities and to be able to purchase materials, not only for our staff, our board, but also for program participants. So, as an organization, we are stepping to the plate. That we are really demonstrating that we are really um, know how important it is to talk about diversity, equity, and
Mhm.
inclusion. And again, with all groups, not only just Black individuals, but all groups, because we are here to serve all. And our goal is to do our best and to ask the questions and to say, what can we do differently? Yes, we are interested in really, really doing our best. Now, Sheriff Maddox, I want to talk about you a little bit more. That as a female individual of color, and you have broken the glass ceiling and being the first Black sheriff. That's correct, right?
The
And
first Black woman to be a sheriff in Pennsylvania, yes, and the
yeah,
first in the county. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I know that there were a lot of barriers that you faced.
Mhm.
So can you share with us about what some of those barriers have been?
Okay. So I don't like to look at it as barriers, but we know realistically that they are. But I'm going to start with, and I'm going to give a shout out to my father. It's Father's Day. Um, First of all, I've always let's put it this way: for the most part, just in case people aren't aware, if you're a person of color, a lot of times when you go to a higher institution, typically you are the only one. Like you're the only one. You may be maybe one of two. For me, in the law school class, one of two. So you have to learn how to reach outside of yourself. If you're in the workplace, if you're in a position of influence, typically it's just you, maybe one or two. So it's natural. It's just natural to interact with someone who doesn't look like me. It's just that's the only way to advance or to get ahead. So part of it, that's just the nature of the thing. But I will give a shout out to my father. One of the things that my father always said, and I take this everywhere I go now, when people said, you cannot win, you are a woman of color, you are the wrong political persuasion, it has never happened. So you know what? You might as well just count your loss now because you know at the end of the day, you're not going to have a job. And so you might as well just give in the towel. And I remember going to my father and I says, Daddy, they said I don't have a chance, that I'm not going to win. And he said to me, you know, before you entered this race, they're right. You didn't have a chance to win. But the moment you entered, there's a chance, you have a chance not only that you can win or you can lose. So it looks to me, your odds went up the moment you entered that race. You got a 50-50 chance. He says, so no matter what, you take the chance that was given you and you run it for everything that you have. And he always says, you don't ever disqualify yourself. A lot of times, I'm going to say for women, a lot of times we are notorious for disqualifying ourselves. We will sit there and think, I don't have the right credentials. I don't look right. I'm not the right body size. I don't. No, let somebody else shut the door on you. You do not shut the door, because the last thing you want is to reach a thing and say, I wonder if what woulda, coulda. So for me, yeah, there's barriers, but I never look in terms of the barriers. And maybe that's just my mindset. I look at the opportunity. I will let someone else deny me, but my philosophy now in life after my father's talk, and I will carry that with me always, is to go with it no matter what. And then I'm a strong person of faith. For people who know me, I'm a strong person of faith. And you know, I believe whatever God has, and some people call it the creator, has for you, no matter what, it will happen if that is the destiny and road for you. Will I say it's going to be easy? Absolutely, positively not. But nothing said it was going to be easy. Anything worth fighting for or having is not necessarily easy. I know, Dolly, you have your doctorate degree. Was it easy? It wasn't a piece of cake. You're working and everything. So anything that you really want, it's not necessarily going to be easy, but you persist, right? My famous words, nevertheless, she persisted. And I will persist and I will knock. And I am not the kind of always will reach across the aisle no matter what. So I'm not saying it was easy, but my mindset doesn't look at what the problem is. I don't look at my skin color. Other people will tell me about my skin color. I was born this color, so I know what I am. I was born in this body. I let somebody else, but I'm going to keep on going and just allow you to tell me no, but I'm going to try anyway. So that's the best I can tell you.
And again, Sheriff Maddox, I am so glad that you were at the table and that your voice is being heard. And as you are in your spaces in terms of law enforcement, that I know that your perspective is always keeping communities of color in the discussion room.
Yes.
That is what's needed, and in terms of practices, policies, and procedures, that you do have that as something that we all really need to keep in mind at every table, at every discussion.
Yes.
And you did touch on diversity, but talk more about why is diversity so important in every space?
In every space, it provides everybody, no matter what you do, you provide a unique experience. Perspective. If you're a woman and you're with a lot of men can't see things the way a woman may see it. That's part of the whole argument. It's like, oh, a handful of men are making decisions for women. I'm not trying to get into that because they haven't talked to a woman. You're making a decision for, let's say, someone who is Latina, somebody who's LGBTQ. You need them at the table. If you're making a policy or decision, you need them at the table. You know what I marvel? I love Longwood Gardens. I love looking at the pink flowers or the yellow flowers or the purple flowers, all the different varieties. People come from all over the world and we just say, oh, isn't this just great? People come from all over and they travel to Philadelphia. They go to these wonderful aquariums and zoos, and we marvel at the zebra and the lion and their capabilities and your uniqueness. And we love the diversity. And yet when it comes to people are just people. At the end of the day, people are just people. We all pretty much want the same thing: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Okay. And yet we cannot get past the exterior, because when you pull back the layers, not to be morbid, I've been on many autopsy. When you pull back the layers and you see the internal workings, we're all the same. We really are all the same. So diversity is really important, because if you're at that table, you're bringing something unique. Irregardless if you're Black, whether you're Latino, whether you're LGBTQ, whether you're Asian, you bring a perspective of your community. It's who you are. It's, that you bring. And the voice needs to be heard. We're community, and everyone we're a melting pot. This is America. We are the melting pot, whether people like it or not. We are, and we're not changing. And so you need to be at the table, and people should embrace it. Embrace it. I wouldn't want to eat the same steak as much as I might like steak. I don't want it every single day. I want variety. And you become stale if you're hanging out with the same people with the same mindset day in and day out. If you're going to grow, you have to have a diverse workforce of people. And that's why it's so important, especially in the justice system. I sat there and said, how in the world are we going to talk about criminal justice reform, prison reform? And there's nobody like me with a seat at the table. So you could think what I think, but unless you've lived it, unless you've been in Dolly, in the barbershop I may not necessarily live in a particular location, but you best believe either at the church or whatever, I'm around it, whether it's Black radio, whatever, that I hear the conversations. And it's just so important that we have that voice. And at least it may not happen, at least hear what I have to say. And representation does matter. Yes.
And also, allies are really critical to diversity.
Yes. Yes.
That there's a great need for all individuals when they see or hear something to speak up about it.
Mm-hmm.
And, the saying, see something, do something.
Yeah.
We need for that to happen, and it needs to happen more often than what it does.
Right.
That individuals see and they walk away.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals hear and they don't pick up the phone and call for help.
Right.
So, yeah.
And if I can just add with that, even just feeling comfortable. So you think about it, sometimes if you're a woman and you're sitting in a room with a lot of nothing but men, you walked in a place that's nothing but men, do you feel welcome? No, you'd probably be like, uh-oh, I don't belong here. No different than if a man walked in and he was the only man walked into, I don't belong here. But when you see somebody that looks like you, it doesn't necessarily mean that y'all have a connection, but it's just something that puts you at ease. Just knowing that there is someone that looks like you. You think about the Domestic Violence Center, there's all kinds of people who volunteer, but everybody has their own unique gift. I may be able to connect with someone that would feel comfortable with me, where somebody who doesn't look like me, they feel like, oh no, you're coming from the main line, Bryn Mawr, whatever. You can't possibly have a connection that I may not necessarily be able, but it's the perception. But when you don't see anybody that looks like you, it doesn't make you feel comfortable. It's no different than what's going on in law enforcement. Okay. You just feel a little more comfortable or at ease when you walk in a place and you at least see someone who looks like you. And I know there's different definitions, and I'm digressing in diversity, but for me, it's what I see. If I walk in a room, it could be, I can tell that you're of Asian descent, possibly. I can tell that you are of a Latino descent. You may not look exactly like me, but I know that you're different. I know that you're different. And this is something that we should embrace. So, yeah.
So, as a leader, what advice would you give to emerging community of color leaders and leaders in all different disciplines? What advice would you give to them in order to continue being supportive of communities of color and also engaging with different groups and being at the table? What advice, and particularly our young generation?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and it has to be something that you really have a desire to do. It has to be a heartfelt desire, because people can spot a phony a mile away. So it's one thing, and I sit there and say, some people, they want to check the box. I have a diversity program and we're diverse, but it's meaningless because we've had a lot of policies and stuff in place. But really having a heart to heart, and I don't want to put this one hospital on the spot, but I won't name them, but I can tell you that CEO really has a heart to change. And one of the things I know that some people are doing, really having dialogue with their employees, not talking at them, but really talking with them. Because until this happened, they never really understood. Talking to a young person, and when I say listen, and I can tell you, Westchester Police Department, Coatesville, we've been having that. There's other police departments as well, but I'm just naming because I've been working with them. Sitting there with a group of young people. And initially the conversations were, the young people were angry. The community was angry. Remember, all this was a powder keg that we've been sitting on. So you can't have a one conversation and done and say, I checked the box. No. So the first time, let the anger and the venting begin. And then after that, start having the conversation and letting the healing begin. But you have to be sincere. One of the best things that happened to us, we started we are part of a group. Young people invited us to participate in a group called Sanji Strong. And initially this teenagers, and some are from Coatesville, some from all over the county. But the healing, I remember the young lady, she just turned 18. She talked about the hurt of her 16th birthday. And everybody will always remember when they turn 16, because if you have kids, they're like, hey, mom, hey, dad, what did you do on your 16th birthday? Well, the police were summoned to my house because people complained that the noise was too loud. Remember, that's always in her mind. But at the end, even though we're still continuing dialogue, she had her 18th birthday and she invited the police, Coatesville, Westchester, myself, for a virtual drive-by. And for me, that was telling, because it's saying we are making a difference and we're turning it around. That hurt. No, she'll never forget that sweet 16th birthday party, but she'll never forget her 18th birthday party either. So I'm saying, for employers, if you're really sincere, it requires a conversation. Don't just check the box and say you did it. Everybody wants to have a program. I checked the box. Really, if you're really, that's the only way. It has to be heartfelt. And it's got to be a lot of times smaller forums. I know the DA's office is even doing smaller forums and moving all around the county. It has to be heartfelt, one-on-one dialogue. And the dialogue has to be continuous. And don't be afraid. For me, you can ask me. I can't speak for the whole African-American race. But I don't mind you asking me questions, because it's learning. It's no different than, I went and visited the mosque and I have friends who are Muslim. I didn't understand. And I said to them right off the bat, if I'm asking this question, I think it was El-Id, and they had something with food, and I didn't understand, and I didn't know what that food was. But they invited me and I went, and I says, if I'm asking, it's because I don't want to continue to be ignorant, because there were narratives that had been out there about the Muslim community. I want understanding. And they educated me, and I have a friend who's Asian, and I'll just tell a quick story. Well, first time the family had an Asian restaurant in Philadelphia, Chinatown, and I'm sitting there and I'm taking the chopsticks, and they were hard plastic, and I'm just playing around, beating them like a drumstick on the table. He says, no. He says, those chopsticks for me and my family is like fine china to you. Now the bamboo ones or whatever, the wooden ones, it's different. I appreciated that, because I don't want to walk around in ignorance. So I would say, if you see me, ask me. I will be glad to share what I can share about my culture and race. I can't speak for everybody, but what I know. And the same thing with you. If I ask, like, what does this mean? I want to know. If I'm asking something to someone who's LGBTQ, there's a lot of myths. There's a lot of things that we call that's different. It's like, no, educate me. But if I'm saying it out of a place of ignorance. But if I'm asking you because I want to be informed, I want to be more knowledgeable. And I would say the same thing of any employer. Inclusion is important, and people want to feel welcome. And that's the best way to do it. So, yep.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate the story of the individual who had that experience when she was 16, and she turned it around on her 18th birthday and invited law enforcement to be a part of it. I mean, that was extremely powerful. Yeah. That gave her strength, and everyone who participated in that, they could see that it is possible that law enforcement can be extremely supportive, and yes, they do care. And also, in terms of the younger generation, I'm asking my younger family members, is that a good thing? What does that mean? And I
Yeah.
you have to tell me,
Mhm.
um, because I don't I need to understand. I don't want to be ignorant, and I don't want to repeat the word if it's an insult to someone.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
so tell
Our
me,
bad and their bad.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah. So again, educate. We need to not be afraid to ask individuals to explain, ask questions, um, ask someone about your experience. And again, as Sheriff Maddox said, please, I cannot speak for all of the Black individuals. I'm just one of many, and my experience is different from Fredda's, and vice versa.
Mm.
And we do have a question. Um, and do you want to answer that?
I
Uh,
will. And it's funny because thank you, Marissa, for that question. Um, some personal things that I'm dealing with. And that is something that for the past week has come up, personal care, because I realized I I have not taken care of myself the way I'm supposed to. And sometimes I just say, as women, I'm going to use women, sorry, we're caregivers and we just give. It's funny, Amelia, I was sitting there talking to her briefly before this. And so I have not, but everything is supposed to be in balance. And I recognize that now. And I have a tendency, I don't schedule me in the calendar. So I'm going to give the advice to everybody. Put yourself on the calendar doesn't mean anything. Sometimes, a lot of times I'm at my desk, I'm eating lunch. If somebody knocks on the door and say, hey, Sheriff, I need you. Can you do? I'll be okay. But no, I have to begin to be selfish and say, no, it's me time. It's me time. But a lot of times we're like, oh, no, I'll do it. But you'll be worn down. So I am learning that. I can be honest. I am not good with self-care. I'm not good with following up, because by the time if you're working for somebody else, you only have so many sick days, personal days. And if you save that time, unfortunately, my kids are grown now, but if you use your time for that or caring for a loved one, where do you get to care for yourself? So I am very guilty. But if on my personal time, what I love is I love Longwood Gardens. I don't mind walking. I need to walk more. I need to drink more water. But if it's things that I enjoy now, I'm recognizing for the first time, why don't I do that? Because I don't practice self-care. And as they say, just like going on a plane, before you can help somebody else, you got to put the mask on yourself. And so I am mindful. I thank you for that question, because that's a reminder. I would sit there, I believe in a higher power, believe in God. He's trying to tell me self-care, self-care. It keeps coming up. It keeps coming up. So, yeah, thank you. I do. I actually do. So, and I started to share this, and I may still send these photos to DV. We had a survivor who was hearing impaired. She was hearing impaired, and so was her spouse. And it was horrific for her to be able to get out of there, because every time the police came to the door, I mean, it was really bad abuse. And every time, sweet woman. But because of that barrier, even when the police came, they couldn't communicate with her. Somebody else intercepted, a family member on his side. And so that stands in my mind. But let me say this to you that happened about a month ago. And I will send the pictures. I asked her through the interpreter, can I send them? She ultimately got divorced. I'm fortunate that my law firm allowed me to help her and get a pro bono divorce. But she's divorced. But guess what? She wasn't from this country. And now, just a month ago, she actually literally got her freedom. Not only is she free from her abuser, thanks for the Domestic Violence Center. Shout out to Angela Halls as well, who's the director who helped with this case. She had a place to housing. Thank goodness for the Domestic Violence Center until that happened. And because I moved on, but I learned how to do divorces in custody, my employer allowed me to help her. And now she has her freedom and she has her citizenship. And she was so happy that day. And I almost didn't recognize her because at that time we were still wearing masks. But it was like the interpreter, and I looked at her eyes and she smiled, I smiled, and I hugged her. I mean, I know I wasn't supposed to, but it was a great day. And yes, so she has true freedom, and she's happy, and she can't thank you guys enough. And to see somebody from the beginning and to see them now happy and free, my, no longer a slave. That will always stay in my mind. And I have the photos as well. And I'll send them to the DV. You'll clearly know who she is. Yeah. Yeah.
That is so wonderful to hear about that empowerment and that individual's feeling of true freedom.
Yes.
When I first read the question, the first survivor that popped to mind in my mind was one that again, I'm dating myself, that I had worked with more than 30 years ago. And this individual, she was a teen mom, and she had been in a relationship with an individual that was 20 years older than what she was. And she had tried for many years to escape from the abuse. But again, you know, the perpetrator always convinced her that he was a good person. He needed to work on his issues. He would go to counseling, this, that, and whatever. And so I had the opportunity to work with her as a counselor, and speaking with her, we began to work through a process in which she would write down what is your goals and what is keeping you from meeting that goal. And of course, her goals were real limited, and the list was lengthy in terms of what was keeping her from reaching those goals. But after about a year, that list in terms of reaching those goals got shorter and shorter, and she began to work on what she wanted to do as an individual. And about 10 years later, 10 years later, that individual became an attorney, and she practices family law. And every year I receive a card for her, and she said, "Thank you so much for believing me and caring for me and letting me know I can do anything that I want to do, and that there are organizations and there are other groups that can help me reach my goals." So I always think of her, and I have the first vase when she graduated from law school that she gave me. I still have it. It's kind of I need to give it more tender love and care, but I said I will always keep that, because when I look at it, I look at um, one who can survive and come out of that place of darkness. Are there other questions? And Sheriff Maddox, what final words do you have for the audience?
Well, I guess my final words would be, yes, you can achieve freedom, and it's a process. And you know what? I look at the Domestic Violence Center like the abolitionists, right? They helped to pave the way for freedom. helping to secure you with shelter and the things that you needed, and keeping you safe from those who would try to keep you enslaved, right? So sort of the parallel there, but yes, it can happen. And I'm looking at the little marquee at the bottom, and no, you are not alone. You heard the stories. You are not alone. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised who maybe they haven't told their story, who has been a victim of domestic violence, or say domestic abuse, because remember, it's not just violence. The law recognizes the violence, but there's also those who will try to control you financially, emotionally, exploitation as well. So please, these ladies are here to help you. They do a phenomenal job. Dolly will be celebrating 25 years, and that's just amazing. And for someone to do that, it shows the commitment that they have just to give and to serve others. I always say it is free, what they're offering. And certainly here at the sheriff's office, if there's anything or any issue that you're having, come to me, send me an email if you work for the domestic, and see what I can do to try to help you. Some stuff I have learned very quickly here is out of my control, because there's those above me who actually control the court. So little things that I just thought logistically would make things easier, even changing a room around during the COVID. I found out I can't just do it. I thought I had that power, but I don't. But if it's anything I can certainly send it up the chain and see what I can to try to be of assistance. And if there's something that we're not doing, unless I know, I can't do better. So let me know, so that I can at least address it and try to do better. So again, I just thank you guys so much for having me for this very important platform. And remember, no matter what, you go for it. You go, whatever it is you want. If it's your freedom, you go for it. It may be a process, but you go for it. Don't let nobody tell you it ain't going to change for you. Yes, it can, but you got to make the first step, right? You have to take the first step. That's your leap of faith. And I trust that you will land on your feet. So, yep. So thank you guys.
Yeah. And I thank you, Sheriff Maddox, and also for your years of commitment to the issue of domestic violence and all other causes that you are deeply involved in. And again, as you talked about, when someone is sincere and when they're not. I know that you are truly sincere, that you are a caring, giving person. And I thank you for being you and for your leadership.
Thank you.
All right. So take care.
All right. Bye, guys. Thank you.